The walk I'm doing this evening is a short walk, can probably be done in 20 minutes, perhaps even quicker. But it's around the area of Fordington in Dorchester. And Fordington, although it's right by Dorchester, it was actually a separate parish, and it's a fascinating place. And we're going to take a walk down there. We're going to start at what I always refer to as the bottom of town, by the old malt house. So this is the old malt house, which used to be called Noah's Ark, and in the 50s and 60s there was actually a bar here and an antiques warehouse sort of thing. Then it was used by the furniture maker Philip Wood, and it was converted into flats about 20 years ago, and we've got bright sun this afternoon. And this is the end of the High Street in Dorchester, known as High East Street. But we are going to veer off to our left here. And you notice the house with the window, that's number 1 of Fordington High Street. And we have here a museum owned by the Ridleys, and it's known as the Terracotta Museum and the Teddy Bear Museum. And the same couple have a Tutankhamun museum in Dorchester. If I turn here, you can see the old Salvation Army, now a dance school, and the famous old Town Mill fish and chip shop. I remember where this house here, this wall, actually there used to be another antique shop. But we are actually going to go up the High Street of Fordington. And you can see this building on the left. As I said, this used to be an old workshop. And then this wonderful building here with the chain on is the old Lot and Warren building. Lot and Warren were a iron making and foundry. This is often a very busy area with people parking for the fish and chip shop. The building which was the museum, actually was a Baptist church. And we have a Baptist church called Dorset, and that building was, because it's by the ford at Fordington, was the original Dorset church. Now, if you look in old books of Dorchester, the cottages on the right aren't actually there in about, I'm thinking photographs of about 1890. There was a whole lot of thatched cottages, and you imagine this whole area of thatched cottages now, it would look lovely, but these thatched cottages were in quite a state, and they were eventually demolished and they built the terrace houses you're going to see in a moment. This lovely blue house here was originally built for the governor of the prison, and it has wonderful views of the prison. The terrace on the right hand side was originally a wonderful array of thatched cottages. Where these 1980s houses are on the left was a fascinating building called the Mole, was a unique institute called the Mole Institute, which was taken down in the 1980s. But the Mole Institute was named after the Reverend Mole, and the Reverend Mole was a fascinating character. He had a family of 8, and he was the vicar of this parish of Fordington, and part of his parish was in great poverty. And Mole designed the modern an earth closet, basically a toilet, and this toilet used earth instead of water, and it was highly effective. Queen Victoria actually had one installed, and there was quite a competition between the water closet and the earth version, and I think there's a version somewhere in Dorchester Museum. Here we have the most delightful Fordington Green, where I'm not sure if it's this weekend or next weekend, there will be a wonderful fete church fair on this very site, because the church, which I'm panning over to, which is here is called St George's. And on St George's Day, or the nearest Saturday to St George's Day, they celebrate with a Ots on the Green with lots of tombolas, a second-hand bookstore. You can go up the tower. It really is a wonderful afternoon. Now, this church was vastly extended in the time of Thomas Hardy. In fact, Thomas Hardy was on the church council and actually resigned over this extension on the right-hand side. The church goes back many hundreds of years, and it has an early 1200 depiction of St George and the Dragon inside the porch. Unfortunately, we are here in the evening time and the church is closed, but I will come back. Dorchester is lucky in having a number of fish and chip outlets, and this is known as Fordington Fish and Chips, and apparently is very good indeed. Now, you might notice the house with the very steep roof. Houses with steep roofs are often conversion from thatched cottages. Thatched cottages need to have a very steep roof. I think at one stage I remember it having a corrugated iron roof. I do remember when this wasn't an Indian restaurant, but it was a pub. And for many years it was a pub, and it was called the Bull Fordington. And I actually remember doing a play here. You can't see it now, but I remember when we did this play, you could actually see up the back gardens of Fordington. And what is incredible is the network of the back gardens. They are incredibly long gardens, and they are in the pattern of the original medieval gardens. Just give a little plug for this Nepalese and Indian restaurant. I have been, and it was extremely good. So we are going to walk. As I said, this is not a long walk, but it's a fascinating walk. There's a one-stop paper shop down here, which is very useful, and then we're going to turn left. Lovely red brick building was the old Methodist chapel, and for years it acted as the polling station in general elections. It isn't any longer, but it is actually used by the town band for their rehearsal hall. This small area of Fordington has a brilliant name, which I'm just going to show you what it is actually called. And it has always been known as Little Britain, long before the TV comedy. Now, if I take the left, which I'm going to go and have a look in the cemetery. I was talking about St George's Day Fair, and there we see that it is actually next Saturday, 25th of April, 1 to 4. So the reason that I've brought you into the cemetery, but some of you might say, oh, that's a bit grim, but it's a very peaceful spot, and it's sort of slightly separate to the church. One of the reasons I've come in here is there's a couple of First World War military graves. This chap here, 22nd of April, same family here. In the very far corner of the churchyard is something which you will probably not find in any other churchyard in England, or you might, but this is quite unique, and I'm just walking down here. There was a bit of a landslide down here last year, which we'll see from a different angle. But following this path round, on this spot, on this quiet part, is a grave. Well, it was a grave of German prisoners of war. There was a prison camp over to the right here at a place called Poundbury, what we call Old Poundbury. And there was a number of prisoners who died, and they were buried here. Now, from my memory, their bodies have actually now been repatriated to Germany, but still we have this most moving memorial. the plaque for Thomas War, who was charged with the glorious 600 at the charge of the Light Brigade. Born at the Grove Buildings, Dorchester, he was the first patient admitted to the Dorset County Hospital. Lübeck is a town in Germany which Dorchester is trimmed with, and if you follow that road down you will get to the recycling centre. But we are going to follow round to the left hand side here to a part of Fordington which in its day had a few issues. Now I could follow Holloway Road to the left or by the Old Swan. I'm going to go by the Old Swan. This is a wonderful conversion here of an old mill which is now housing. So this is the mill stream which fed the mill we've just seen, and it's actually a stream which is sort of diverted from the Froome River. I mean, the blossom is great at the moment. You can just hear the train from a distance. There's some elderly care flats here, and behind them some new elderly care flats. This is called River Crescent, and the road stops here, but the track continues. We've got some really useful information boards here, and here it tells you, I forgot to mention it, so I said Fitchon Lane, but this street here is actually Mill Street, and you can read about Mr. Alfred Harmon Edwards, who formed the Mill Street Mission. And you can actually see a map of the old Mill Street area.